what are three core areas that you need to get right into once you buy a business?
100%. Yeah. The three that come to mind, and they're kind of like three Ps, if you want to think of them that way, is people, process, and profit. And by profit, we kind of mean your cash flow analysis. But to start with the first one, the moment I walked in, and it's the case, I've taken other jobs and other teams, but just in different settings, everyone's like, who's this guy? Who is this guy? He thinks he knows something about what we've been doing, and he can just walk in here. And so immediately it's trust building and assessing. And, you're incredible at that, the tools that you use.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we explore how to buy, sell, and optimize your business. I'm your host, Chris Seegers, and I'm so excited about my incredible guest, Nathan Moody. So Nathan Moody, I always like to talk a little bit about my guests and say what I love about them, maybe what a superpower is. So here's a few things. Nathan is an incredibly brilliant man, a scientist, a business owner. He's a man of God, first and foremost. He has a lovely wife and family. He's running a great business. He does long distance running, which I think is crazy. So many things to dig into, Nathan, but welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate the encouraging highlights there. As we've discussed in the past, all those highlights exist amidst real struggles that are still ongoing, and it's part of the journey. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, yeah, man. Always focusing on the gap and the gain. We got to focus on the gain and all the blessings that God has provided. Okay, so share your story with our audience. What business are you in? Why did you pursue business? Give us a little bit of the high-level story, and then we'll dig into some specific questions. The goal with everything we do is really to think about how do we help somebody who's maybe 2, 3, 4 years behind us, and some of the things that we've learned that maybe will shorten some of that learning cycle for them. So just tell us about what business you're in, how you got to this point, what you did before.
I love it. Okay. So I'm in advanced manufacturing. That's the business. It's specifically precision machine shop, and it's a focus on prototype and fabrication, usually of electromechanical systems for aerospace and other advanced applications. Our focus is to work on high impact customers who are just coming out of an R&D phase. And so they have a really good idea. It's probably proven from the physics and fundamentals, but it hasn't been scaled to production. So that's kind of what we call the technology valley of death. And we'd like to help them walk through that so that their hopefully innovative product or high impact solution actually makes it into the hands of the people that need it. So that's what we specialize in, bridging that gap. And sometimes it involves reverse engineering and all kinds of other fun stuff. So I got into this space firstly because it's a core component of my own career. As you mentioned, I have a science background. I'm a research scientist and later a program manager at a national laboratory. And I have depended critically on small machine shops for at least the last 10 to 15 years. And I've viewed them as essentially mini innovation hubs. And they're not usually recognized as that, but I would rely on them as a customer at that point to help me, again, take something from a napkin, maybe not literally, but at a stage where it's not ready for production, and walk me through the difficulties, because they're always there when you do prototyping. And so I would almost consider them, worked with multiple shops, consider them part of our team, and treated them as such, and brought them into our, as much as would be allowed, into our discussions. And so I loved it so much that I began to say, what would it look like to learn this from the owner's side? And
Absolutely.
Begin to apply what I learned and what I knew, not just as a customer.
Let me interrupt you right there, Nathan, because the first time you and I met, what was so attractive is you and I have discussed this concept of taking ground, right? Taking ground for God's kingdom, taking ground in our nation. So talk a little bit about that, because you had said, you had this great job, great team. You've lived in the place for a long time, and something spurred you saying, you know what, I'm going to do something super, super hard with a lot of risk. So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's what it ended up being, the conversation with the family, is that we want to be very purposeful with the remaining years, however long the Lord has for us. And that usually isn't done if you're coasting. And we felt that we
Mm,
were in a place where the ability to coast was there, the temptation to coast, and it was actually socially accepted. And it began to feel unhealthy. And so we had an urge to take on something hard. Certainly, when you're running races and things like that, there's a mental training to that aspect where it's part of what you do and you train for. Anyway, we connected it with a growing uneasiness. We read a book called The Fourth Turning is Here. My wife and I did, and
interesting.
it began unpacking kind of just, it's a long discussion, but how to contextualize geopolitical events and how they're cyclical and how we are heading into, as a nation and even as a world, into a period that's possibly more challenging than not. And you see it in the markets and other things. And going into that with, as a nation, with an atrophied manufacturing capability has made me feel uneasy for a very long time. We've seen it from my previous job. We've probably all seen it at some level through supply chain issues during COVID. But the fact that a superpower has trouble manufacturing some of its most useful and complicated components and systems is disturbing to me.
Hmm.
And so I
Yep,
asked
absolutely.
myself, can we get involved, even if it's at a very small scale? There's no reason that at a small scale we couldn't apply the absolute best industry practices. And whether or not we scale, we can measure ourselves within our domain, and that feels like progress. So that's,
Hmm.
I don't know exactly what we talked about earlier, but I think it was along those lines. It's certainly the growing uneasiness of the atrophy in American manufacturing strength.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what we live into as well. Is there's this massive transition coming. No one ever taps you on the shoulder and says, it's your turn to lead. It's just you got to step into that crazy abyss and say, you know what, this thing is happening. I think I have some skills that might be useful. I don't know a lot about what I need to do, but let's go try to help this transition, especially in the marketplace. How do we keep these businesses going and keep the economy moving forward and continue to bless people and continue to bless our community and clients? So let's dig into the business acquisition. So we really focus on how to make this buy side, sell side transition go really, really well. We always want win wins. We always want to bring a buyer and a seller together that have similar core values and culture, and then say, how do we make this transition smooth for the employees? So let's discuss that. And just, you don't have to talk specifics, but how do you think a seller can set up their transition in their business? Could be in any space. How do they set that up well? What were some things that you learned during your transition that you're like, man, to do this well, these are some of the core areas that you should focus on?
That's a great question. I think that most seemed to me unprepared, when we went through about a dozen, 10 or so, evaluated 10 deals and selected one. But some themes that we saw, that it was, is if I could have spoken with them earlier before they even really decided to sell, I'd thought of three things, and I'll unpack them in sequence. But know yourself, know your business, and then know your industry. And specifically, what I mean by that is know yourself. What I found was that at least one of the sellers that we ended up buying from, wasn't fully sure what it meant to retire, like the practicalities of an exit and that capital gains, and are they ready for that? And what we found was that he was sort of in real time thinking that through, instead of having had someone coach him through, here's what this is going to be. Why don't we set some expectations of what a deal closure, deal execution looks like? It
Mm-hmm.
was very clear to me
Absolutely.
that, not really for any fault of his own, because nobody showed him, is he didn't know how that was supposed to go. And so he began to discover things along the way that were disturbing, like the capital gain that he would face. And that caused a hiccup in his decision process
Mm-hmm.
that for me
Absolutely.
had an impact. It was almost a 3 month delay, and we walked through it with him. But I wish I could have said, wow, had you been coached, you would have been prepared with that answer. So know yourself. Are you really ready to do this? Do you have the right people around you? He didn't have the CPA, lawyers, people surrounding him to help him make a good decision. And then, know your business. The biggest question was, can this business really run without you? Because if not, the transfer value is very low, and you really don't have a business. You have kind of a fire sale potentially. And that's a bit extreme, but that understanding wasn't there. So really having them evaluate his business, including, are your financials ready? Finding that out in real time that they're not, is painful for him and for the buyer, and it's totally avoidable. These were all self-inflicted wounds that would have made things better for him and for everyone. Do you have a due diligence checklist? Do you even know what due diligence means? Can we coach you through that?
Absolutely.
Those kinds of things. And we could go on about that, but know your business. And then finally, know your industry. Know what your EBITDA multiple would be. Apparently, a wealth advisor said, given your retirement goal, here's what you need to get for the business.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I told them that's completely unrelated to the business. The business has a value, and that's in the marketplace. That's going to be what it is. What you need for your retirement, again, it's an important consideration, but those are two completely different things. Didn't know about EBITDA multiples in the industry, at least scaling of a certain size. There's an expected multiple on your EBITDA that you should be expecting to get, and that sets an expectation. And so each of those I know could be podcasts in and of themselves, but I think that
Absolutely.
had those conversations occurred earlier, it would have been a much smoother for the seller, especially. I mean, I kind of knew how to navigate it because I have people like yourself and others in my life, but he didn't. And I tried to be as helpful as I could, but we clearly had to stumble through.
I love that, man. So that is almost right in alignment. So as we've coached folks on both sides for a long time, the first thing we do before we talk about the business at all is walk them through a tool we've created called the Clarity Tool. And the Clarity Tool is 4 quadrants of clarity. Clarity of your worldview. Are you in life to serve yourself or serve others? Which is really important when you sell your business. Because if it's all about the money, number one, you're probably not a good client for us. It won't be a fit because it means you're not going to transition your team well, you're not going to transition your clients well, and you're not going to set up well for the buyer. So clarity of your worldview, which most people don't have if you ask them. Second is clarity of your current reality. So I think that's what you just alluded to, like, where are you today with your business? What are the things you need to work on? What are the people and processes? And then clarity of your dream life or your dynamic vision, whatever you want to call it, kind of like a 10-year, 5-year, 3-year, and then clarity of the blueprint to get there. And so within that path, if we can help them get clarity in those 4 quadrants, then we map out the blueprint. And that involves getting the right team, the right processes, the right tools in place. But if they have clarity on the front end and we can say, hey, you actually don't want to sell this business right now, you're telling me, because of this, that, and the other, or hey, you want to sell it for this price today because you want time with your family. And then we have a second tool called the one-page life plan, which you've seen before, which is really trying to get people to have a business plan for their life. And what we found is most people that want to sell their business don't have congruence or need to put energy into usually 3 or 4 pillars, either their faith, either their family, their fitness, or their finances, one of those 4. And the top two are generally their fitness and their family. Hey, I want to sell this business because my health is failing, or I've seen some health issues that I need to correct, or I'm not getting time to work out, or I need to sell this business because I've got grandkids. I really want to invest with them. So if we can get them clear on that and the goal, then mapping out that blueprint becomes very easy. And it makes it really easy on a buyer because we're like, here's this whole 3-year plan for the business and for the seller. Here's what we have to achieve. Here's what a LOI would look like that would be successful. Here's all your tools and your checklists and that sort of thing. But I appreciate you sharing that because I think, like, for folks going into this process, keep in mind the sellers oftentimes are getting really poor counsel and have zero clarity. So have grace with them, but also make sure that you're super dialed in on your end to make sure you don't waste a lot of time with somebody who really doesn't know if they want to sell the business yet, which is not your problem, right? Your goal as a buyer is like, I want to buy this business within this time frame and this buy box and these metrics. What do you think? What's 1 or 2 things you wish you would have done differently during the acquisition and onboarding process? It could be pre-acquisition or once you've onboarded it, or just a lesson you've learned.
Yeah, I think looking back, setting expectations with the seller, and it gets back to the conversations that you just described, walking them through a structured thought process ahead of time would solve this problem. But, since I didn't know to do that and didn't have that tool at the time, certainly at least sitting down with them and say, hey, let's try to set some expectations about how we're going to, are we both committed to the deal execution? Because up front, the answer was always yes, but really saying, okay, well, what will happen when an unknown occurs, and saying, are we going to get back to one another and can we do it in 24 hours? I wish I had said that because I was always trying to walk back delays and things like that. So I think just trying to be much more upfront about here's how I see this going. In what ways does that not match what you are expecting? And then let's talk that through because we might actually not want to do this deal. And then if I need something to be true about the deal, then, and I talked to you at length about this, I need to be doubly clear about or robust in my due diligence. And by that, I mean, especially as a first time buyer, we want a number of things to be true when you start out. And what happens is that if you shift from wanting it to be true to assuming it's true without actually checking, a price will be paid.
I love that.
And
That's an
I paid the
excellent
price.
point.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
learned
all of
that
us
lesson.
have, right? We all make these
Yeah.
assumptions that, hey, this is right. This person's going to stay for X amount of time.
Yeah,
Or, hey,
whatever
we
it is.
don't need to add this person. Or, hey, the profit is going to stay like this. And then we get into the business and it's like, ooh, I actually didn't run through that and check it and confirm it.
And
So
it
that's an awesome point.
and it's my fault, right? So owning it, and that was a big part of it. But I think those two probably come to mind. There's obviously lots of other things that you could change, but those are probably the two things that had they been done differently would change everything. And it still was a very positive experience. So I keep that in mind.
Absolutely. So, as we think about, you've bought the business and you're freaked out, which every one of us are, right? Like we've bought a business almost every year for the past 4 years. We're looking at buying another one. No matter how many times I do this, I still get the fear, the anxiety, all the things that you think at some point in time are going to go away because it's always stretching you. It's always different, right? And like
100%.
you alluded to it, there's no faith unless you're growing past what you can do, right? So you don't need faith if you know, hey, I know I can do this. It's within my powers. But it does take faith if you're like, man, I'm jumping off the deep end. I think we can get there with the grace of God, but I'm not sure how. What are three core areas that you need to get right into once you buy a business? What are the three areas you're like, I knew I had to get these things dialed in the first 30 days or 1 week or whatever it might be?
100%. Yeah. The three that come to mind, and they're kind of like three P's, if you want to think of them that way, is people, process, and profit. And by profit, we kind of mean your cash flow analysis. But to start with the first one, the moment I walked in, and it's the case, I've taken other jobs and other teams, but just in different settings, everyone's like, who's this guy? Who is this guy? He thinks he knows something about what we've been doing, and he can just walk in here. And so immediately it's trust building and assessing. And, you're incredible at that, the tools that you use. I had to quickly, kind of while doing everything else, assess, are the right people in the right places? Just because they have a role given to them by someone else, it's not a guarantee that they're the right fit for it. So the dual goal of understanding the person, building their trust, and then assessing, are they in the right place in the business for the time? And then processes are really the software, the operating system for the business. And it can be literal operating systems like we're using here, where we automate part quoting and enterprise resource planning, or it's just literally write it out on paper or a whiteboard. And in fact, we did that first. It's like, let's whiteboard this thing. What we did is, if we could all write it down and agree with what we said the process was, that's when we called it understood.
I
If
love it.
it's a bunch of talking and nobody could write it down, I didn't stop, because it was like, until we use actual words and somebody can disagree with the word, then we haven't arrived. So we walk through all of our processes. They obviously are changing because we're now using industry best practice, which is not necessarily what was there to begin with. And then profit. I mean, this is a game in some sense. You can consider this any business is got rules, and one of the rules is you can't go broke. You can't have $0 for the forecasted cash flow. So just teaching everyone, if they, not everyone had the same awareness of AR and AP and how the basics of cash flow analysis work. It's not just checking the bank account, that's not the same thing. So putting it together in a model that's simple to use, not onerous, and people feel like, I would do anything except for look at the cash flow, was a top priority. I think those three still are what I would do in the first 30 days to counsel anybody. Just get a handle on those things: people,
So
processes, and your
people,
profit.
processes, and profit. That's incredible, man. So let's dig into one real quickly. So you're an engineer by background, right? So you love the data. We've got some engineers on one of my companies, and sometimes their social ability is less or more difficult, right? To build rapport, to build that loyalty. So this is really beneficial. So walk me through, did you have a process for, let's just dig into people, because I think people are everything, right? Like if you get the people right, you can figure the rest out. As you thought through, how do I establish loyalty? What were a few things that you could give our listeners that were things that immediately like, hey, here's a process for how I could build loyalty?
Well, yeah, great. I think the number one thing is listening. So I took each of them to lunch on a separate day. I said, I don't have any other focus other than you for the next hour and a half. And I want to just listen. I want to hear what your experience has been. So kind of sketched out. It wasn't scripted because I didn't want it to feel scripted, but it was structured thought in that, why did you get into this industry to begin with? What do you enjoy about work? What frustrates you? Why did you choose this company over others? What do you hope never changes? And what do you hope should change immediately? And just asking those people and just listening and reacting. It built rapport because, I think they expected me to come in with lots and lots of agendas, and obviously I have some, right? You need to as a responsible business owner. But I started with listening, and we just scheduled those meetings, had those in the first 2 weeks, everybody. So there's other things, but I think that was what my superpower was, is tell me more. Tell me
Yep.
more.
I,
And
I love that, man. We did the same exact thing. We built a questionnaire,
yeah, it was a
and then
questionnaire.
I used that as a template, but really, as soon as we started the conversation, it kind of went out the window.
Yeah, because
Um,
it flowed,
100%. And really, for me, on every business we buy, the first thing I want to know is like, tell me about your family. Tell me about what's important. Tell me your husband's or your wife or your significant other's names. Tell me your kids' names. What are they into? Because those are the things that ultimately, if we can help them there, right? If we can cast a vision for an exceptional life, activate and equip others to live an exceptional life, they will be loyal because they're like, man, you care about me. You truly care about me. You want to know these things. And I want them to know those things about me. And also, it very quickly shows you, like, if we talk about purpose and core values as the foundation of every business and every great life, you also, from that conversation, will gather, this person is probably not a culture fit, just with some of the things they're saying. So we had, on the last business we bought, we had a team member that was just constantly critiquing other team members and saying how everything wasn't working. And I'd be like, okay, excellent. Like, what's your solution? Like, how do we make this better? Well, I don't know, but everyone stinks and, blah, blah, blah. And eventually I just said, hey, did you know we have a core value that's honesty and respect, which means that if you have something you need to communicate, you need to go talk to them about it. And eventually it was just like, you know what, this is not something that they want to change. This is a culture, this is a fit that's not going to be a fit for us. Now she can go find a fit somewhere else that has different core values. I love that, man. So let's talk about stories, because I have so many stories. And I think that the quality of your life is the quality of how you tell stories to some degree. So like, what are some of your favorite stories about the business acquisition? Could be crazy, could be funny, could be hard. Is there one story that comes to mind of either before, now that you're just like, man, this is just an excellent story?
Well, there's multiple. I think one really does stand out, and it illustrates God's provision and his favor, even when we didn't know specifically to pray for it. But it involves finding a key person. So in the business, there was an office manager who had been with the company for at least 7 years, up until fairly recently, I think within the last 2 years. And then she was let go because of some differences of opinion and alignment, I think, with the former owner. But of course, I didn't know any of that. And as we talked about, there's transfer value in a business. Someone who needs to understand how it works at a very intimate level has to be there with the business. Otherwise, you have a building with things in it that don't know how to run. And some connections were made where this person was made aware that ownership was, and I reached out to her and said, here's the vision, here's what I'm doing. And she said, well, I'm currently in a management position, but that was the best job I've ever had. And it's my dream job to work where she no longer worked and where we now acquired. And so I said, well, what would have to be true for you to come back? And so we walked that through in terms of some offering. And within 2 days, she obtained the permission from her former employer, because there was a 2-week notice, to come and join the company. And it turned out she knew better than the previous owner. She knew everything, every customer, all the internal processes. And so I guess that the story, what amazed me is she was the transfer value of the business, and she wasn't part of the business. But
I love that.
I couldn't have programmed that. I couldn't have said, you know what, my third action item after acquisition is go find a former. My head was spinning with so many things to get right. And of course, a superpower was asking questions. So I did ask questions of a lot of people, and it was through those conversations that this person's name came up. But still, it was their own life choice. Am I going to take a chance on this Nathan Moody, this guy I've never met, and it happened over at the Village Inn,
Nice.
Garden of the Gods,
The classiest of all establishments. Do they
classiest.
still
Yeah,
let you smoke in there?
I didn't see anybody smoking, but it wouldn't surprise me. But
I'm surprised that place
it's a
is still
special
open. It's
place
kind of like
now.
Perkins. That's
Yeah,
right. It is.
but I
Every
mean, to
time you
me, it's
drive
like
past there.
that's where this provision occurred. So I mean, forever now, I'm like, that's a favorite spot for me. It just was amazing to see that in the space of 24 hours, I went from having no one in the business who understood at the granular level. And I'm talking like not just the weeds, but the roots of the weeds and the bacteria on the roots of like that level of cognizance and situational awareness of the company. In 24 hours, we went from not having it to she was part of the business. She's locked and loaded, and we're back to where we were with the
Yep.
customers. And the customers were as if nothing changed. They were just, Danny, it's great. So
I love that, man. We have a similar story. So we hired a gentleman December of last year, and everybody was like, you shouldn't hire this guy for these reasons. Same thing as like the confirmation. I was like, man, I don't even know if it's worth the interview. And my partner and brother Marcus said, you know what, man, like we need to actually go down this path. Like, why are we discounting this guy based on somebody else's opinion who we don't even really know whether it's a valid opinion? And so I said, okay, I'm going to do a 30-minute interview. And like this kid, and he is a kid, he's young, just lit me up. And I was like, this guy has the core values and the culture fit of us. And all we found out was like the previous leader he was with had a leadership style that was very confrontational and combative and militaristic, which is not a bad thing. I mean, for a lot of people that works, but that was not our style. And that was debilitating this young man. And so I said, hey, let me tell you a little bit about how we do things in our business. And this is either going to magnetize you towards us or away from you. And at the end of the conversation, he was so lit up. And I was like, dude, you're in. Like, let's go. And we obviously went through the whole hiring process. But this kid has been positive every day, has got a bunch of family issues that are really difficult, and just shows up and does a great job. And I could have very easily just been like, no, not a fit. And I think this is a guy that could take the business that we now own and operate and do it himself and either buy us out or build it himself. I mean, he's got that much capabilities. And so I think like for us as believers, or if you're purpose led or faith led, I think it's almost ingrained that like, hey, should we look into this when it involves people? Should we give it another shot? Should we do this? Should we have a little more grace, just like we would expect to have? I love that story, man. And I think that's a great example. So we're almost to the end of our session. And I hate this, but I like to keep these short so our viewers can digest them and move on. What are some things you want to leave our listeners, viewers with? Is there one learning that you've had? Is there a book? Is there a tool that you've been like, man, this is incredible, I want to share this with the folks that are listening to this podcast?
yeah, I think the one book, there's so many, but one is Lean Startup for me has been amazing because it enables you to, especially when you're nervous and the first time, retire this notion that we need to be omniscient. Somehow we need to know everything. It embraces very quickly the notion that what you should do is ask the right question, run a test in a safe way, in a manner that gives you insight into the fundamentals of what you're trying to interrogate or understand. And the system will tell you what the answer is. You don't need to know it. What you need to know is be very good at asking questions. And that's been a daily and certainly weekly practice in here as we're running learning cycles where you build, measure, learn. What did we learn? Okay, let's make a pivot because what we learned is we don't want to do it that way. But it allows me to lead without assuming I know everything because I already know I don't. So then you have to have a different process, but you do have to have a process. Otherwise, it's hard to tell people what your framework is. And so Lean Startup has really answered that question. And the other is what you said. It's, what we do is as important as how we do it. If we are successful and excellent in turning out a product, but we leave a wake of hurt, in our employees or team members' lives, then we have absolutely gone backward. So that's just a core value that we've mentioned from day one, and we continue to do it, is that how we do things is just as important as what we do.
I love it. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us.
My
If
pleasure.
somebody listening to this has a question or just wants to connect with you, is there a good spot or contact that they could reach out to you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at nathan.a.moody. That's my at nathan.a.moody. And I'm on Facebook if you search for Nathan Moody. Certainly you can also find me, I believe, on the web at lifeontrail.com. That
Nice.
tells a little bit of the broader story and how we do hard things in the mountains and elsewhere.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Exceptional Companies podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.